some things you cannot say.
If you're thinking of coming to America, this is what it's like. Everybody's very fat, everybody's very stupid, and everybody's very rude.
They said them all.
Some say he never blinks, that he roams around the woods at night foraging for wolves. All we know is it's called the Stig.
Making a career out of motorsport is hard in my Top Gear days. I just crashed a car and I was like, I think they said if you crash again, you're done.
The Stig was one of the best kept secret. How confidential you had to be in your job role.
I had my own vision of how I would go about this. I never took the helmet off. I would arrive at work in a balaclava, even in my civvy clothes. In the end, it did become a shitstorm.
You've never really gone into too deep what actually happened. Are you ready to?
It's such a negative story, so I'm really reticent to sort of talk about it.
Be natural. Try. Ben, 2 weeks ago, we literally didn't know each other. However, 1 week ago, I was in the back of a taxi, heading out in Las Vegas whilst dressed as an orange Nemo, sat next to one of my childhood heroes, the Stig. I also found out that he's a little bit of a piss taker during that week and have come to actually be quite close friends with Ben already, I'd like to think. But before we tell the listeners how we got to that crazy point, which I was definitely reflecting on, in your own words, who are you and what do you do?
Well, Benedict, it's lovely to sit with you in your van. Yeah, we've had a great week, haven't we? But so who am I? Well, I mean, so I'm Ben Collins. I was born in Bristol and grew up in America. And then through one way or another, ended up becoming a racing driver, which is kind of like a dream thing to do. But actually, my original dream was to be a fighter pilot. But yeah, so I'm Ben, the racing driver, is kind of how I see myself.
And it's fair to say in your past life, a point in your career, you probably had one of the most recognisable outfits in television history, which is quite simply a white racing suit and a white, I'll always remember the brand, Simpson helmet. It was the thing that car lovers and kids like myself, when they watched Top Gear, were always captivated at who could be behind the other side of the helmet. But when I've heard you speak on other podcasts about your story and parts of your career, usually it always starts from 2003 onwards, which we'll get on to why that was a impactful, critical year. But I'd actually like to go pre-2003. I want to try and get across to the people that watch this and listen what it actually takes to become the Stig. So what did life look like growing up for you? What was your earliest memory of a car?
Earliest memory of a car is trips with my dad. So he was something of a hooligan with machinery and in general, but he loved driving fast. He loved cars. And so for him, the company car was the thing. So he was, he would have these jobs and other than the work, his main focus was what was the company car going to be. And these were conversations that would sort of evolve on these various trips in between bursts of sort of overtaking and cornering and handbrake turns, end of our drive, that type of stuff. So I guess that was there. I mean, and on the mantelpiece was Senna's Lotus. So in the background, he would watch these Grand Prix. I would be out doing my own skids in my little go-kart. I had a replica. It kind of looked like a Lotus F1. It was a pedal car with plastic wheels, and you could make it skid. That's my earliest memory of driving. In the sort of as a baby really, and actually when you look back, I was kind of drifting it at walking speed, but still for me that was the thing. And one day I remember him and my cousin pushed me in this thing, and that was the first sense of speed. They got me up to sort of running pace, which was extremely exciting. And this thing was quite unstable, so it was sliding around. It was just the best feeling. But that kind of got parked for a few years because I then moved to the States when I was 5. Got into competition, so I became a swimmer. So I was swimming twice a day, lots of training, which was a great thing for lots of different reasons, health but also focus and getting used to being competitive, dealing with your nerves, the mental approach to stepping up to the block, all the technique that made a difference, sort of tenths of a second that make us a big difference to the outcome. So I was learning all those kind of things and getting on my BMX and doing all that kind of 80s stuff.
Was that in your teenage years?
This is like between age of 5 and 10.
Wow.
So that's growing up in the US, Atari, it's decades before you even were a glimmer in the milkman's eye. And so that was growing up in America. It was the best time to be in America was in the 80s. It was an awesome era. Then back to the UK, lived on a farm, and there was farm machinery, so mechanical stuff with engines, and so I just terrorized the quad bike. And actually, that was a really formative thing. I learned a lot of car control. I was messing around, trying different techniques just for the hell of it, and but not really with any particular goal in mind, other than having fun. Until I was got my first experience in a racing car when I was 18.
So that does cover off quite a lot of competitiveness in growing up already, learning about racing, learning about tenths of a second, not even necessarily on tarmac. However, you did mention that even from the youngest years, you were already involved in being pushed around in karts and basically not motorized, but vehicles in some sense for word on the road. Do you remember when the first time that you thought, I love this, like I love cars, I love automotive, I'm passionate about this, rather than, because when you're a kid, sometimes you're just placed into stuff. And I've seen even friends of mine from school that their parents pushed them into, say, tennis or whatever it was. And they ended up falling out of love with that particular thing because maybe they didn't really deep down love it. When did you discover that you actually had a real passion for driving?
So that's a really good point, because I think there's a lot of burnout in sports, and particularly from people who are pushed into things. And it's not their passion, it's their parents' determination. They've tigered them into a situation. And I think, you do need to be pushed sometimes, and they're to be encouraged to try things, whether it's swimming, football, you name it, anything that you go and do that you're into, and you try and take it to a higher level and develop your skills. That can take you in all sorts of different directions. But yeah, and I think that's true with racing. Look at karting. A small percentage will make it through. But there's a lot of parents there yelling at their kids, to force them and cajole them into a position that they don't actually inside. That's not really who they are. It's not what they want to be. But to answer the question, for me, that I enjoyed these road trips. It was just a thing. We used to drive to whatever holiday we were doing. We would drive across Europe. That was a thing we did. It was quite fun / unbelievably boring. The back seat. So there'd be some spirited driving. That would be interesting. The longer distances before, games consoles were invented that you could take with you, portable devices. There's a lot of getting car sick trying to read dodgy books and stuff. So for me, though, the time I got totally passionate about driving properly was first time in a racing car. So I was 18, went to Silverstone, drove through these gates, and I had a little bit of a taste of it. My dad had started doing some racing. I'd been to a Grand Prix. I'd seen it and Senna, and was becoming aware of what this scene was. But when I was sitting in the car for the first time in a single seater, you're less than a centimetre from the ground. Where you're sitting, your bum is right on the floor, and turned it on, and you just feel the whole thing shake, and your body is bolted into it with these belts. And before I even set off, I knew I was hooked, and I knew it felt like I was home. I just knew that was me.
I think that a key point is you just mentioned that on a road trip necessarily, because this was years ago. I think we can mention that you're in your 40s now.
That's fine.
Yeah. The Botox helps.
It's factual.
But but you mentioned that on a road trip, you didn't have things that we have now, phones, distractions, games consoles, etc. And I think it's almost natural that in racing these days that you'd be now looked at a little bit funny if before you got to a track, you haven't proved something on a sim. So, but back then, your first experience of actually racing, the first chance to prove yourself was actually behind the wheel of something that could kill you at 18. So you loved that straight away from the outset.
Motorsport has been born out of, originally they were racing these things on roads. That's where it all came from. Circuits. Le Mans was born from the road races, Paris to Madrid. They're just open roads. Just used to hack it across. So that was pretty dangerous, and that's why it was a safety improvement. But ultimately, you're only really going to learn how to race by doing it. And whereas the sims are fantastic, they've evolved now to a place where they are so much closer. The better the sim gets, I find the better I am at the sim, because it's becoming more realistic. So your sort of instinctive responses and reactions are more tuned into what the computer is doing. So it's become less fake. But still, mechanical and G-forces and all that stuff, you're only going to learn that by actually doing it. And so, you go out on a track, you do some testing, some practice. It's a remarkable thing how quickly human beings can adapt to speeds that are well in excess of what we can walk or run at. It's just a weird quirk of evolution that we can process speeds in hundreds of miles an hour, but actually it comes quite naturally and you can learn it quite quickly. So with a little training, it doesn't take long to do what outwardly seems to be an incredibly dangerous thing. You can learn it very quickly. And actually, that's why I love also instructing. So, fast forwarding to the Top Gear days, teaching the celebs in a car that was fairly simple, like the Suzuki Liana, I had 45 minutes. You could take someone. I mean, Johnny Vegas was a great example. He had not attained a road license. He came to the track with his instructor, who was rolling his eyes at the stuff I was telling him to do, and was listening in, just thinking, this guy's creating an absolute nightmare, because he still didn't really know how to use the clutch or anything. And I looked down at what he was doing with the pedals, and I said, "Oh, that's quite an advanced technique there. Your left foot braking into the follow through." And he just said, "I'm doing what?" He had no idea where his feet were, so he just wasn't thinking. He was just doing it. And if you've got an instructor with you, then that's fine, and you're able to experiment. So yeah, he really couldn't differentiate the clutch from the brakes, which obviously for advanced driving would be a problem.
But for that window of time in between you sat in a car with Johnny Vegas, the Stig on Top Gear, and getting in a car for the first time at 18, sitting there, Silverstone, one of the most iconic tracks. You mentioned that you're in the States growing up, but you'd come back and your first race was actually in the UK on home soil at Silverstone. What was that like then?
So that was my first tryout in a car was at Silverstone, which was just mind-bending. The feeling of it, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and this thing just felt like a fighter pilot at ground level. And actually, the speeds at ground level feel much faster than up in the air. So I've been lucky enough to go up in a fighter jet, which was a boyhood dream. Went up in a Tornado, and it's quite fast, but it doesn't feel as fast as on track. So it's weird how these things sort of are different. But it was an amazing feeling being bonded to that car and being completely transported. It completely disembodies you. You are just. It's just motion and the sensations that are coming through the wheels to your hands, through your bum, through your body, your chest. Everything is united with that machine, taking you to this completely other world. So that was just driving on my own. The first race, though, that was a different deal altogether. So that was at Brands Hatch. I'll never forget it. At the Brands Hatch, it was a Formula Ford festival. Hundreds of the best drivers in the world were there. I was in a sort of subcategory called Formula First, which is a similar thing, little wheels that poked out the side, spindly little thing, but extremely fast. I could drive the car fast. I qualified third, but I was surrounded by karting champions and all this kind of stuff. People were very experienced. I'd never done a race before. So I had to get it off the line, and I think it was a bit greasy, whatever.
It's quite interesting, actually. You didn't have the car. The karting wasn't part of the story here, really. It was just kind of dropped in a racing car.
Yeah. So I was fast. I had no idea how I was doing it. I was just there. And people come, what have you done before this? Well, nothing. I live on a farm. This is it. And people didn't believe that because I was fast, but I had the raw material, but I didn't have a clue how to really put it together. So into the first corner, my heart was beat. It slowed down. It was beating so hard going into that corner. The adrenaline dump was unbelievable. We were swarmed together. There was 3 cars wide. I had one car sort of nudging me in the back. It was all going off. And so being able to take a corner, you couldn't even see the corner. There's cars everywhere. So that was quite exciting. And I slid wide, I think, at the 4th corner. The first lap was like a blur, but I still remember skidding wide and sort of drifting through the gravel and actually cut the face of a mate of mine who's a journalist who was watching at the time. So I made a mark on him, literally, and finished the race without crashing, which was a miracle. But I was up at the front from the get-go, and I had a steep learning curve of how to compete on track with other cars and race offline, defend, not defend, all that stuff.
So was it your first part of you having a career and work, etc.? Was that in racing?
What was that question again?
So the first time you mentioned that you were getting into racing at an early age, and it's kind of family passions and growing up in a world of racing and cars and all the rest of it, kind of ended up with you sat there in a race seat, like what the hell's going on at Silverstone? Did that develop into like a career quite quickly?
So no, so making a career out of motorsport is hard. And so I wasn't sure where that was going to go. Growing up, I had lots of different ideas what I might do. I wanted to join the army, or I had, whether I'd be a lawyer. So I carried on with those, because the racing seemed to be even from the early stage, quite a fickle thing. You've got to find sponsors. It's extremely expensive. You've got to compete, be at the front to justify all of that, time, expense and everything. And, to get going, the only way you can really finance yourself with various ways you could be working, but was to go and instruct. So I started doing that. That was the sort of one way, but it's not brilliantly paid. You're doing your best. You're learning another skill, but it's, you're looking for every sort of opportunity to try and find some way of furthering your career. And to do that, you've got to find the sponsors. And that's knocking on a lot of doors, but it isn't easy. And luck plays a huge part in it, and who you know.
And you knocked on the right doors then?
Eventually. So I had some good contacts. So I did get some sponsorship. So that got me through into Formula 3 and to America. So I raced Indy Lights in the States. And that team had some funding as well, which helped. But then that funding ran out. So I got as far as I could go. And then it became a career because I then switched across to doing Le Mans prototype racing and sports cars, where the teams have got funding. They're hiring professional drivers. I got to drive for Ascari, who had this incredible, absolute beast, this Formula One engine in a Lola chassis. Ascari was the team.
They're based in Spain, Ascari?
So so Klaus Schwartz, who set that up, he built the track in Spain, in Ronda, which is a beautiful part of Spain. And he created this team, and his dream was to create supercars, which he did. The KZ1 and the A10, which is another beast. We got both of those onto Top Gear, which was awesome. Unfortunately, when I lapped it, the track was half damp. That car would have gone fastest otherwise. So he realised his goal. He built these cars, which is a huge undertaking, and got to see that up close. It gives me a huge respect for you look at what Christian von Koenigsegg has done. I know from seeing the trials and tribulations that Klaus went through to start a car company at that level. It's hugely intensive and complicated. So to get
there's a lot of people that have tried, and maybe a few that it's hard to say if they've succeeded or not, if they're just constantly being funded and cash pumped in. I think you've got the likes of the Apollo IE is another small car company manufacturer. I think Pagani's so well established now that he's smashed it at Asia in the same way Christian has. And I actually asked Christian once. I luckily got to visit the factory, and I wanted to ask him a question. I was thinking about what I could ask him, and I said, would you say Pagani is your biggest rival? He said, no. He's like, because our customers have both. He's like, I have more customers that have both than customers that just have one or the other. So he said, I actually think Pagani is our biggest compliment, like to get the best out of both cars. And it was quite amazing to hear him saying that they just sort of had their different directions. But I do think deep down there was some level of rivalry. But no, Christian is a wonderful guy. And you obviously drove some of his machines in the early days as well. Do I remember seeing an orange machine with some tyre stuffed in its mouth once?
It was silver. Thanks for bringing it up. Both of it. Horatio Pagani and Christian, both of them have got something in common. They have stuck with it, and it's taken years and years and years of extremely hard work to get where they are. They're both artisans. That doesn't really make any money though. You've got to be able to sell the units in enough volume that it justifies all that design and tech. They've both done it, and it's a huge. You've got to commend them for what they've done. They're so determined. The CCX that I drove on Top Gear was an early model, and they'd been using it they were really keen to get, I think it was a production record in a straight line, like top speeds.
They're still chasing that now.
And people say, I could care less about that stuff. Like really, it's pretty meaningless. Unless you're on the Autobahn and you want to drop down that cog and
it's just top trumps.
Say it's top trumps. I get it because it gets headlines, but who cares? On a daily basis, you want to, how does it handle? That's what matters. So the car arrived, it had been stripped of all downforce. It didn't have much anyway. So it's the car was very light on aero. This is the early CCX, and the ride height was quite high. And there's a few things going on. I'd noticed that the brake pedal was a bit soft, and the power steering was a little bit tired. So there were moments, and that car was a beast. I can't remember how much horsepower it had, probably 600. So maybe I'm going to get that figure wrong. Manual gearbox, this huge soup spoon, like massive handle, but all Victorian sort of feel to it. And not denigrating the car, it was awesome, but it was a beast. And it will be, for me, the most exciting lap I did on the show, because it was literally all hands on deck. This heavy steering, it was coming, going a little bit. The power steering was coming, going. And I was firing it around these corners. And you come out, and the ratios are fairly short, I remember from memory. So I had to change gear quite a lot whilst sliding, coming out the hammerhead. There'd be a couple of gear changes. So you're controlling this quite heavy car. It's quite unruly because the ride height was high. And doing it one-handed whilst trying to engage these gears and not screw up a gear change. And second to third was a bit of a, it was a bit of a journey to get it cock on. And if you don't get it cock on, you lose a couple of tenths of a second, and that doesn't get the best out of that car, which is not fair. And I was always absolutely determined that anything I drove on top gear would get the absolute maximum performance. Otherwise, you're just lying to yourself, you're lying to them. When the next car comes along, if you haven't given 100%, how do you compare them? So I was always determined to do it. Anyway, a bit too determined, because I tilted it into the follow through, and I'd felt that I could maybe just carry a tiny bit more speed through there if I could just float it in just a few miles an hour quicker. The tail broke away, and I caught it as the power steering quit, which it will tend to do. You've got so much caster and camber, and the steering effort is massive. So I should have anticipated that. And anyway, I couldn't unstick the steering wheel, and it just shot me off the track. And as soon as I sort of changed direction, I was doing about 100 and something mile an hour. I just thought, there's a bloody tyre wall here. It was a tyre wall I'd never seen. I'd never been anywhere near it before. It was in the middle of a bloody field for no reason whatsoever. And I couldn't change trajectory at all because I was on the grass. So I'm bombing along and just cleaned this thing out. And this tyre got jammed into the sort of mouth of the car. And we were desperately trying to get it out. It was embarrassing. It looked ridiculous. But the ambulance was coming up, and I thought, at least it's my mate, because there's, friends of mine in that. But actually, they were just transporting Christian up to look at his damaged car as much as anything. I was obviously fine. And he got out. I thought, oh no, I've got to apologise and explain. So we did. We had a good conversation. And I thought I'd get fired, actually. So I remember going up the steps to the porter cabin to go and see my boss, Wilman. It was fairly early days in my Top Gear days. And I just crashed a car. And I was like, I think I'll probably get fired. It's a hypercar. It's a expensive thing. This can't be good. And he was extremely good about it. Actually, Clarkson immediately backed me up and just said, it's a wild animal. I'm amazed you hung on to it that long. So I thought it was the opposite of what I expected. I thought I was going to get told off. And, I was obviously feeling bad about it. Spoke to Christian and said, look, if you sort this out, bleed the brakes, lower the ride height, stick a wing on the back, I reckon it'll go 3 seconds quicker. So that's what we did. And it did.
And we've just discussed how you're basically bombing round a £800,000, I think it is, 600 horsepower plus manual crazy Koenigsegg round a track. But you are the only guy in that white Stig suit at that point. But yet, where your career kind of started, and one of your earliest memories of racing and enjoyment was actually on a track where you couldn't even see the corner because there were so many cars around of you. Racing's clearly a funnel. There's hundreds of people, thousands of people that would love to get into racing. Then it funnels down to the guys that actually end up as 26 on that grid or 12 on that grid, or whatever the circumstances is. And then there's the people that get to the peak of those and move on. But there is only one Stig suit. How did you get that?
The thing is, you also asked in there about some of the racing skills that there are lots of different pockets of skills you need to learn to be a good racing driver, which I hadn't really, I had to learn that from scratch. I read Senna's book many times, watched as much information. He was my sort of idol, if you like. That helped a lot. It also worked against me to some extent. He'd raced go-karts since he was a kid. I hadn't. He won everything. So I thought, right, that's obviously the simple model. You need to win everything. And actually, in fact, that was a mistake because it affected my risk assessments of all the moves. I thought you need to win these races, do whatever it takes to get to the front. As a result, I had a lot of crashes. So I wrote off in my first season, I completely destroyed 3 cars in the first 5 or 6 races by being totally uncompromising and forcing moves that weren't on with this dogged belief that you need to, like Ricky Bobby, get to the front.
Like Max Verstappen-esque from these days, just kind of chuck it down the inside, or I'm coming through, or we're having a crash.
Well, he's perfected it. I mean, he is the ultimate in lots of different ways. So he he has created a new overtaking move. I mean, and to do that, you think how long people have been racing around in cars. No one's ever thought to drive that way. He's got a new move, and that is he has developed a way of braking into a corner. And it's like, well, actually, the edge of the white line is where I can go to. So I can brake later because I can go all the way to the far side of the track and then turn left or right for the corner. It completely destroys the other driver. So it's within the rules. You've got to race between those two white lines. If he comes past you, he's probably going to take you all the way to the white line and then turn away. And you're going to be left high and dry on the outside lane. And some people might go, oh, well, that's not fair. It's a bit rough. It's whatever. The thing is, without braking maneuvers, it is like it's like playing poker. You're quite good at playing poker. I saw you in Vegas.
I wasn't. I lost a lot of money in Vegas.
Did you?
I was very much up, and in 1 second, I was very much down.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's life. But it's like that. You win or lose. And you can also, when you're out braking your opponent, the opponent has a choice whether to try and stay you down and try and compete with you and end up completely hung out, or let you dive up the inside and let you go too far into the corner and switcheroo on you on the way out. There's so much into it. But he has coined this new max move, and it works. And he's taking down champions. So that's his overtaking prowess.
But that wasn't what you were like then.
Well, I was in all the wrong places. So I was hanging out on the outside of 3 cars in a 120 mile an hour corner. I had no business being there and got punted into the wall. That destroyed that car. I ended up in a bathtub. I mean, literally all the wheels came off. One of them nearly killed my teammate. The wheel and the suspension, the entire thing flew in the air. I don't know how high because I was spinning backwards at the time. My teammate said he was going towards Hawthorne at maximum speed in this car, and this thing just landed. It bounced over his head and disappeared. So that was the end of that car, chassis number, whatever it was. Another one at Linden Hill was in qualifying, and I was fully lit. Someone had a moment in front of me, and I had to get out, had to get around it. Like that, I barrel rolled, destroyed that car. I can't remember what the other one was. Must have been hit on the head. But so yeah, after a while, realised that needed to adjust that and start picking. You have to pick your moments, basically. So that's a key part. That's racing. It's also knowing how to deal with the pressure of being in front and when to defend your position and when to attack and all those things. The other side of it, so that's racing. The other piece, though, that I found harder actually was the qualifying runs, particularly when you get into the faster stuff with slick tyres that need to be activated. You have to get them into an operating window. And usually with a new tyre, that window is only open for 1 or 2 laps maximum. And the car doesn't handle perfectly in that time. You have a much higher grip level, but it will handle differently to how you've been driving it in all the practice sessions. You have to be able to imagine what it will do, and you have to work on how you activate it. And you need to be motivated in that session. And I wasn't motivated in the qualifying sessions. I loved the racing and the fighting side, which meant that I would often qualify not well enough and then end up with these big battles, which were great fun. People will say this was highly entertaining. But if you'd qualified properly, you could have won the race. And you go, okay. So that was a technique you have to work on, and that's on your own. That's totally in your own headspace.
Whilst keeping a seat.
Whilst keeping awake.
Whilst keeping a seat. Because if you keep crashing a car, eventually you don't get to stay in one.
Well, that was basically what happened. They said, if you crash again, you're done. I was like, okay. So that was the element of fear that was needed, because I was 18, 19, I had no concept of, couldn't give a toss what happened to me. As long as I was competitive, yeah, a bit of fear was needed. So, yeah. And once I got the qualifying sorted out, that was it's a cerebral thing, and you do it on your own. And it's, you're not fighting with other cars on the track. It's about a perfect lap. And that's the skill that ultimately got me the job on Top Gear, because you're on your own. Nobody's there to tell you to go faster. Well, occasionally Andy Woolman would do, but I took his kind regards and made my own decisions on what to do, because I was already doing my best, and he knew that. I think he used to enjoy it, and I used to enjoy his pep talks. But yeah, you're on your own and you've got to figure it out. So my audition was with Willman. I didn't know that he was the boss. I turned up in desperate need of a belt, sort of saggy trousers. His bum was hanging out of his boxer shorts.
You literally just turned up because you saw an audition available to go to?
No.
Like how before we get too far, how did that happen? You were in racing cars 1 minute, learning how to qualify, and then you're in an audition with Andy Willman at the Top Gear track. So what's happened in that gap in between?
Yeah, so I got to this sort of peak of my career racing at Le Mans 24 hours in the top category at Le Mans, LMP 900 it was called. It's called LMP 1, or it's hypercars now. Similar sort of thing, 225 mile an hour in a car that's got more downforce than Formula One car, but they weigh more. Incredible bit of kit. And racing around the world was fantastic, but still fighting to make a living, basically. So I was looking at other opportunities, and TV seemed to be a good place to go because that would get brand exposure for sponsors. So that got to be a good thing. So I was going around doing the rounds a bit with TV stuff. But I'd seen Top Gear. I remember the Noel Edmonds show, and I was hassling and hustling to get some work with the magazine, with the TV show. And that led to this, for whatever reason, they were looking for a driver. And so that's how that meeting came about. So Willman got me involved, took me to Dunsfold, where I met him there. We had a stopwatch and a Ford Focus. And he showed me the track, because it's quite funny. It's an airfield. It's quite flat.
Yeah.
So it's all white lines.
I picked up on that when we were, for anyone that hasn't picked up on it yet, we were in Vegas last week and we had a good week.
It was awesome.
And you mentioned something which I just hadn't considered ever in watching it, which is, of course, an airfield track is really different to a racing track because there's not really any elevation changes. You are racing on essentially a table level rather than somewhere like Laguna Seca where it's all about the corners but the elevation in them. So that was quite a different adjustment to get used to at all, or?
Yeah, although, funnily enough, the first corner actually has some elevation and that was quite relevant. So there's a few different lines through the first corner. And apparently mine is different to how a lot of other racing drivers tackle it. I felt it was quicker. So I would cut the distance and get it in and try and get fast in and fast out, but also cut the distance. So you cut the distance, it's shorter on lap time. But yes, it's different. And also the boundaries are marked by white lines. So you have to know where those are. So that was kind of what we were doing on those early laps, like scouting around, seeing where they were. And I was like eyeing them up and working out and I was asking specifically, can I cross that? Can I do this? What are the rules? So in racing, you're allowed, if you can have all three wheels across the white line, but as long as one is on the tarmac, the official bit. But they didn't like that Top Gear. You were not allowed to cross the white line. So no cutting corners, which I was always desperate to do because between the first corner and Chicago, there's a white line, particularly in the really powerful stuff. You'd be desperate to cut it because you could carry a lot more speed and you could brake later to turn right. We couldn't do it. And we watched for this stuff and I get penalized and it was all self-censoring, if you like. But he showed me where it went and, threw me the keys to this thing, Ford Focus. I was not racing a Ford Focus. I was racing a thing with massive slicks, tons of downforce and 850 horsepower at high speeds. And now in 150 horsepower road car, front wheel drive, never raced a front wheel drive car, except obviously shenanigans and as an instructor. So that was kind of what I relied on. And I threw it around as best I could. Willman looked extremely nonplussed with everything that I was doing. And he's like, is that as fast as you can, I said, how am I doing? He's like, yeah. He said, is that as fast as you can go? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, yeah, thanks for coming. That was it. So didn't get hired. Didn't really hear anything until a month later. And then I got the phone call, which was, can you be in on Tuesday? Turned up on Tuesday. There was a white suit and a helmet. And that was that.
And I think that's quite relevant because at any one point, did you realise you were getting into something that essentially was going to close off you as a driver? Ben Collins was the brand, was the driver, was always the guy racing on track. Did you ever have any fears about stepping into, I mean, there must have been a lot more to it than just stepping into the white suit because the Stig was one of the best kept secrets, or certainly in the eyes of the public, was one of the best kept secrets in motoring history. Many years, some people would say, is that Michael Schumacher? Is that, and there was all sorts of theories to who it could be. What was your first experience on understanding how confidential you had to be in your job role?
So before I started, there was a Stig in the black suit, but not for very long. It was about 9 months. I think it was two series, 2.5 series. And then he was killed off. And it was around that time, before or just as he was being killed, I happened to be in touch with the show. And then they fired his character off the end of an aircraft carrier. You may remember this. And he was floating in the North Sea. And apparently the aircraft carrier, because they did this, they threw this Jaguar into the sea, but it didn't sink as fast as they thought. And the the boat nearly hit the car, and that would have had to have been reported as a collision at sea, and the captain could have lost his job. So it was quite a big deal. Fortunately, it didn't hit the car. Anyway, a little tidbit of information there. So I'd seen what the character's about, and as a kid, I was a huge Star Wars fan. So Stormtroopers, Darth Vader, Boba Fett, you never see their face. That's kind of a key part. You can see how that develops a character, and it makes it something. It's really interesting. So I thought that was extremely cool. So when I started, I had my own vision of how I would go about this and maintain the sort of secrecy of it. And in my usual way, a sort of OCD did that to the full. So I never took the helmet off, and I would arrive at work in a balaclava, even in my civvy clothes, so that there was no possibility of being identified. And that wasn't something I was told to do. It was just how I interpreted the best way to build on that character.
But did that get more serious as the years developed then? Like, oh, you really need to keep your character secretive now. How would you turn up to somewhere, like for argument's sake, when the show was on in disguise and then leave without some sort of pap getting a photo of who they thought was the man getting out of this white suit?
So fairly easily, in a way, it was quite fun learning these games and what you could get away with. So I would park in a randomly. Also, we were lucky because Dunsfold's quite a secured site. So it's ex-military. It's where they used to develop the Harriers, jump jets. And they still have a guardhouse and all that kind of stuff. However, people can sneak in, and we were always aware that there were paps crawling through the woods with long lens cameras and stuff like this. But they weren't going to get much. And so I'd park in a random spot, find out of my own little route I would take to get in, and you're quite mindful of your surroundings. You can see what's going on if you've got your eyes open. So I get in, and I get in very early before anyone else was really there. And it was quite a quiet estate back in those days. So that was all right. That was straightforward. I knew where I was getting to. I used to get changed in the Harrier pilot's old room, which is quite cool, this old brick thing before we had the port cabin. What got harder was when we go and do stuff in London, and I'd have to go between being Ben so for instance, I used to drive these Range Rover tracking cars around. So we'd stick we had a film crew in the vehicle, the boys with the tailgate open, filming the presenters.
Oh, wow, it was never like just the racing out on track and you'd be roped into kind of driving all sorts.
Yeah. Driving tracking vehicles, getting involved with some of the planning for some of the shoots and some of the crazy stuff we come up with. But yeah, it was great, which was really fun because you would get involved and you'd see how the boys were shooting stuff, and you'd see how they were sizing things up. So I'd have to there would be that moment when you have to get changed in a telephone box type thing, and pulling that off. So at that point, it would have been worse to walk around in balaclava, probably get arrested, definitely these days, and kind of having to hide in plain sight and just be a bit low key, be the grey man, and stay out of sight, and then reappear. So that side did get harder as time went on, but I would try to be ahead of the game. So like when we get checked into hotels, they were putting me down as Ben Collins, which I said, please stop doing that. And I created a new name called Richard Jameson, which tickled me because it was Richard Hammond, James and son from Clarkson. And I got my own. I had a BBC. I should have brought it. A BBC card made, fake identity with that name on it. So that people wouldn't start reading, because you'd have that conversation, we check in and go, oh, do you work with BBC? It's not what you wanted to hear. So that kept that under wraps as well. That was helpful. But yeah, just having to be tactical and just think around how to get around it. But it got harder as time went on, because by the end of it, I think I'd been there 8 years. And in the end, there was something like 120 people at the BBC knew who I was because of turnover in staff.
This is what I was going to get onto.
Insurance forms, risk assessments, all of these.
And that's just within work. That must have also grew in your personal life, that people started to cotton on what was going on, how many people found out, etc.
I was super careful with that, because your mates are the last ones you should tell until it becomes defensive. So I think one of the big outage things we had was the health and safety report after Hammond had that horrific crash in the jet car. I was named on the report because I was going to be driving it, and I'd been involved in some of a tiny fraction of the build up to that, basically. And that didn't help. So it's like, well, who is this racing consultant that was in some way involved? and the papers got, chewing on that, and they were getting it right, because I was there. So we did a lot of different disinformation. Wikipedia had just started, so there was always a bit rumors on that. And then YouTube just started. And stupidly, I was asked to do an interview in my first series, and having never worked in TV, I didn't know any better, although it felt wrong at the time. And I did an interview with this Dutch presenter for their TV show. They said, no one will watch it. It'll be fine. And I said to the producer, are you sure this is the right thing to do? He said, yeah, it'll be fine. But 2 years later, it resurfaced on YouTube because YouTube was recycling
so
everything.
If you really tried to find out, you could probably find out as a diehard fan.
Journalists were very good at it, and they pretty much worked it out. But they didn't spoil it until the BBC revealed me in the Radio Times, and then it was they thought it was open season, and that's when it started coming out in the bigger newspapers.
So during your time there, you got obviously really close with Clarkson, Hammond and May, and not only that, you got to instruct, as you said, because it's amazing how many skills that you have when you're younger that you think you may not end up doing that again. But you mentioned one of your first ever jobs in racing to earn some money was actually instructing. And you probably never thought that 10 years later or however long it was that you'd be sat in a car with, let's go throw some names out there, Cameron Diaz?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a flex. That's pretty cool. You mentioned, who is it that you mentioned earlier? There was Johnny Vegas. Yes. It was a great bit of fun. So you've obviously got some people that stick out. What were some of the relationships that spring to mind that you really remember from those days at Top Gear? People that you met?
So the thing with instructing, which particularly with racing, you and any racing instructor I think would agree with this, and probably it's true of whether it's water skiing.
Was that helmet on?
Oh, Top Gear, yes, helmet on. Your helmet's always on anyway with motorsport. You've got a helmet on, crack your visor open and talk. You probably get 1 in 10 people come through the door who really can drive, and they don't realize it yet, because how you drove to work this morning has no bearing really whatsoever with how you was driving on track. They are two completely removed skills. Although once you've got the racing skill, you do start to have a much higher awareness and perception on the road. It makes you a better driver all round. So you'd activate these people. You'd get 1 in 10 who could be activated, and they would just take to it and you'd be like, here we go. And they're joy to teach. And
Simon Cowell springs to mind.
So Cowell was really interesting. So he was hilarious. He had a very natural feel. I managed to convert him to sort of a couple of racing skills that he took to, but all of which he forgot because he actually came to the track twice, and I couldn't believe that he had sort of reverted to his home brand of driving, shuffling the wheel like they taught us. I was like, he's forgotten everything I showed him. And the second time I said, let's try and do it like this. He said, I like it this way. So he did his own thing, but he did it really effectively. He had a very natural sense of his own environment. He obviously could feel the car, and he was fast. He set fastest lap both times. Although I'm suspicious because he said in one of the interviews, he said, I've got a secret, and I'm not telling anyone what it is. So I don't know if he cut the track. I was always watching. I don't think he did, but he was very good. So I don't know what secret this was. Maybe he's an electronics wizard, and he just put a different ECU in the Suzuki for his hot lap. Anything's possible with him. I mean, you don't know.
So you instructed all these guys while at Top Gear. So did Simon Cowell, for example, know who you were as the Stig? No, you still had to remain in disguise and be ultra careful about
helmet
the guys.
On, visor down.
What did that do to you after a number of years? Always being this secretive person. Did you enjoy that?
I loved it. It was fun. I mean, I didn't want to be on camera because that's quite intimidating. You've got, it wasn't something
Yeah, that's exactly what you do now.
Now that's what I'm doing. Well, that's been a huge challenge to get past that. I mean, it was horrific.
First, it does sound like back then you weren't interested at all. So it was visor down and you were enjoying it.
It was perfect. Go out, have a great time. You're involved with this exciting thing. You've got these crazy people, the presenters doing these things, and they're hilarious to watch them in action on camera, as particularly off camera, and the live shows. If only someone could have recorded what they were saying to each other before they went live onto the stage, it would just, break the internet.
So they are very much even toned down when you see Clarkson, Hammond and Main on TV versus what they're live on camera.
Some things you cannot say. They said them all, and they were really, really good fun. So the live shows actually is where I got to hang out with them the most, and go out and hit these cities after hours, and have a really good laugh. They're really good fun. And also, the broader team, camera team, all that as well, unbelievably skillful. talented people. And the production team, all the ideas, the creatives, coming up with idea after idea. You got, Richard Porter is a well-known member of that team, the script writer, also involved all the ideation. So a big family, really, a dysfunctional one, but a fun one to be part of. So yeah, it was a great journey.
Who did you get on with the best?
To be honest, I really enjoyed all three. They're Clarkson is such a force of nature, but when we were out doing our stuff, we spent a lot of time together. Got to go to his house in the Isle of Man for that amazing shoot we did out there. It was a proper riot, and you're quite deeply in someone's personal life at that point, and that's a great place to go and find out what the crack is. And that's, Isle of Man, what a place! No speed limit.
I've been there. I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, they're all good fun, and we did some crazy stuff.
But what went wrong?
Well, all good things come to an end, and so in terms of the secrecy side, that veil was starting to slip. So I mentioned the Radio Times article. That was a massive own goal. There was, unbeknownst to me, they'd done a front cover shoot with someone dressed up in a white suit. It was the front cover of the Radio Times. Who is the Stig the nation needs to know, or something like that. And then you opened it up, and it was my picture and my bio inside. So that was a main own goal. I had some building work going on. My builder slapped on the table and said, "Oh, mate, can you sign that for me?" I was like, "It's nothing to do with me." And he said, "Oh, no, you're in here. It says you're the Stig." So that happened, and then a couple of the Telegraph picked up on it. So, well, they're playing with this now. We kind of know it's Ben, so we'll start doing our own articles. And I started to hear rumours about getting other people involved to start doing my job. And I thought, I've been here a long time. Why at this stage should I be slowly phased out? I'd rather be locked in and do more. So I decided it was time to go. So there was a few hints that my time was coming to an end, whether I wanted it to or not. And I thought it was best to go out on my own terms. So that was the thing. So I handed in my notice. I'd written a book, which I was, I got that sort of in progress, if you like, and as a sort of way of telling my story, because I knew that it would be quite a big deal when I stepped out into the open.
Shitstorm, basically.
Well, I didn't know what it would be, because there were a lot of different ways that could have gone. In the end, it did become a shitstorm. It was quite a thing.
So you mentioned it was a bit of a shitstorm, but you've never really gone into too deep what actually happened. Are you ready to?
Well, sort of. The atmosphere at the show was definitely changing. I noticed that we used to have the crowd used to come to the track, and they would go to the studio and all that sort of stuff. And James was always brilliant. James May used to go out, make everybody tea, hand out biscuits. And then, as the popularity grew, then some security guards appeared, and then tensor barriers appeared. And it was becoming this very, I don't know what you call that, but it was different.
Corporate conglomerate.
More corporate, and there was more of an edge to things. There was just some of the fun had vanished a little bit in the sort of just the easygoing nature. Just when it was a smaller show, it had become this much bigger thing. The merchandising stuff was everywhere. The I Am the Stig t-shirts, which were hilarious, were becoming a thing. But yes, it was a feeding frenzy around the Stig brand thing, and it was being called that now, the Stig brand, and all this sort of stuff. I was quietly getting on with what I was doing. I was loving it, but there was definitely more external pressure than there had been before. And it was just it was a bit more severe around where we were working. And I just sort of saw where it was going, and I just felt that I was going to be. I thought I'm going to be phased out. I can see it. It's going to be phased out. They're going to have people coming in. We're going to do things in different countries, and there were a few direct hints. Well, not just hints. We were going to do. Top Gear was going to do the Le Mans 24 hours, which for me, this is golden. It's literally why I signed up to do the job, it's such a negative story. So I'm really reticent to sort of talk about it, but it was one of the real reasons I thought this is not going the right direction, and we were going to do this race, but they were, fuck, I can't talk about this. It's just I just can't bring it out because it feels negative.
Sometimes you got to talk about negative to get to a positive.
People think it's a whinge. It's not. It's yeah. They'll think it's a whinge. I'm not a whinge back. Right. Ultimately, I wanted to go racing and beyond just doing the Brit car 24 hours. And when I saw that, for the thing to grow, this is just a whinge. It's turning into a whinge.
Be natural. Try. This is the real Ben Collins. People don't get this. This is why I do this. People don't get this. People think that we've all got to be these. You mentioned at the beginning that you were when you were thinking about things to do when you in your career, it was either going to be a lawyer, which is quite straight, or if it's going to be in the army, which is quite straight. But everybody, and we always bring this back on this podcast to try and make the listeners realise that the people that get in these positions, the Stig, Hammond, Clarkson, whoever that we're talking to, are actual human beings. And even if they're in these positions, which are like one in the world or something really special or amazing, that we are all actually human. So, as you say, there's a bit of a whinge, but we have bits of our whinge in a career. And if you've been at a show for that many series, something clearly has happened, which was the final straw of all that. Because in most people's contracts and business, it's quite simple in the real world. You have a 30-day cooling off period, or you go and get put on garden leave and you're on to the next thing. But there is that thing normally that triggers somebody leaving or someone being phased out. And if you say that is a key moment in your story, then you should potentially share.
Yeah, I mean, I was pissed off because the racing, like I said, it's always about money, this, that, the other. And we were going to the plan was to go and do Le Mans, but they needed a driver to pay for it. And I thought, I'm back to square one. It's absolutely back to square one. I just
Even
couldn't
with the funding of the show and all the rest of it.
Yeah, so that was kind of a breaking point. And I just thought, you know what, I've put so much into this. I want this to be so cool. I thought, Stig going racing would be the be all end all, and that really was hard to sort of swallow. And there were a few other things too that were like that, where I couldn't be in all different places at the same time. But I felt that actually I've been incredibly loyal, and it was really difficult. And I was still, on a very short-term contract, one day at a time, pretty much. So it was.
And who was helping you with that behind the scenes, get through that?
Well, we were all there because we loved it. So, and this is the thing. So I only have a positive reflection of my time. I absolutely loved it. It was the best job in the world until it was time. Until I felt that the time was up, and I think it had grown so big. You've got to just accept. I either stay here and accept that's the way it is, or go and do something else. So I decided to do something else, and that was to forge a new career. And now that's in a completely different direction. But it
wasn't quite
crossroads.
That simple, because we mentioned the word shitstorm.
Yeah.
So what was the trigger point? You mentioned them on. That's where you wanted to do that idea. That never happened. You felt like you were being phased out. What was the smoking gun? What was the bullet?
Well, leaving was the hard thing. So having decided to go, I thought, again, I was aware it was this huge thing. When I started Top Gear, it was around a sort of 2 million audience. By the time I left, it was 500 million worldwide. 72 countries were broadcasting it. Stig was it was everything from a stress doll to a morning clock. What else was there? There was a pull string thing like Woody from Toy Story. It was on lunch boxes. I'd seen people walking around the high street in London with an I Am a Stig shirt. It had become a thing. And, the BBC is a big organisation. You don't want to tangle with them. So I wanted to do it the right way. Also, I wanted to do right by my boss. But I also wanted to do right by myself. So, I considered what I was going to do, and I handed my notice in, basically. And so my last series, I think, the last guests I had, not knowing they'd be the last guests, because I didn't know at the start of the series, but my last show was Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz. So that was an amazing way to go out. It was pretty cool. And it was really hard, sort of saying to, someone who'd become a friend, this is my last series, this is why I'm going, I've loved it, let's work it out. But ultimately, it became a legal battle, and it was a pretty unpleasant one.
Because you wanted it to come out as, I am the Stig. Your T-shirt was the only real one.
Yes, exactly. And, I've been there 8 years. That's a massive hole in your CV. If you just, you go on to your next thing. What did you do for the last 8 years? Not much. It also seemed to me an opportunity for someone else to come in and start fresh. Again, not my decision to make necessarily. That's not my show. But freedom of speech is a important thing.
And I try not to, when guests like to keep their private life more private, which I know that's the kind of barrier that you're on, but just if you could give us some insight. You mentioned, like, if you hadn't have come out, you'd have this great big hole in your CV as well. But I also try and look behind the scenes a little bit, like family-wise. Obviously, you mentioned you've got a partner and you're married. That must be quite difficult for family around you as well. I could imagine a friend of something saying, "Oh, what does Ben do?" Like, how does family members navigate that? Like when people say, oh, "What does Ben do?" And it's like, "Well, he's a racing driver, I guess." Is that basically the spiel that was put out?
It was. I mean, to be fair, I left in 2010, but by that time, it had been in the press so much. It had been in almost every newspaper, and it was becoming almost impossible to defend it. So family and friends, close ones, I'd sort of create a little bubble around so that at least I could have some help sort of fending people off. But it was practically impossible. So having, if I'd left that, it was so out in the domain. It was on Wikipedia. It was all over the place. So the kind of cat was out of the bag, really. And so there was a timing element to this where it's like, okay, no, this is up. And that is why I was starting to hear. That's why Michael Schumacher came onto the show, was to help throw a smokescreen, and also because he's awesome. I think let's go get this other way around. He's awesome. So it was, it was a great opportunity to get him on. But there was a reason for it, which is that there'd been an explosion in the press, and it was great that he came in and did what he did. And hilarious to sort of get him out, got to meet him, both of us in these Stig suits, trooping around together, was really funny.
But was that legal battle that ensued the hardest thing that you've ever dealt with?
Yeah, the most stressful because it's a huge, you don't realise how big that organisation is until it turns its eye on you and is in attack mode. Huge legal department. So that was all there. Had to go to the High Court. That was no joke. And it coincided with the birth of my son. So, and we did try and move the date and they wouldn't move it. So that all happened at the same time. And it was a big deal. And if it had gone the other way, there was all sorts of ramifications and I'd have probably gone bankrupt. So it was an important one but equally, and I could have walked away from it. But at that point, I felt it put so much pressure on. I just thought, there's no way I'm backing down now. I'm leaving, and it's not right. At that stage, it was not right how it was handled.
Where does that mental resilience come from?
I don't know. It's just I've grown up. I think I've always hated bullies. I think that's so actually the more something grows and intimidates, I dig in and push back.
There was never a time in that where you thought, I just can't do this anymore, I'm throwing in the towel.
I think there's definitely, that you've got to have a voice of reason. And I was fortunate to have some great advisors. I was also very fortunate to have fantastic support from my publisher, HarperCollins, and the individuals there that made a massive difference. And my amazing agent, Mark Lucas, who's a literary genius and fantastic human being, to really guide me through and sort of like, you're doing nothing wrong. This is a process. This is now a process, and you'll get through it.
But you did get through it, which is excellent.
Did get through.
And there's something on the table here, which is he's clearly advertising a book.
Well, I bought that as a gift.
But as he mentioned,
Christmas is coming.
As he mentioned, the Stig became a global brand. You can walk in any corner shop, probably in any corner of the world at one point, and there'd be anything from a coaster to a squishy toy in there. So no doubt that being able to then put, I'm guessing the result of the battle that ensued enabled you to be able to do things like this.
Exactly.
So was this here your first book, The Man in the White Stuff, The Stig, Le Mans, The Fast Lane, and Me, Ben Collins?
That is the book they tried to ban. So that was it. And so after that result, this book came out and did really well.
Am I going to get a signed copy?
I'm going to sign one for you.
Are we going to have a bookshelf in the Road to Success van?
Do you read?
I do.
I'm just checking because there's not that many pictures in this one. Okay. Right, here we go.
And whilst Ben writes this, I say most of the time on the podcast, I try and sit back and ask the right questions to people sitting opposite for them to then tell their own story and just kind of point it in the right direction. But even from a personal perspective, for me, I've obviously sat down with a lot of people, but anything can happen. Like I'm now sat in the back of my van
with the
Stig.
I think I spelled his name right.
To Ben, the Dick, Live fast.
Isn't it
the
Ben the Dick?
stick.
I thought it was Ben.
I'm
just Ben, just plain Ben. I'm not Benjamin.
That is perfect. And I will actually read this. I will read this and I will update everybody on the socials of how I get on. But it's probably last week when we were in Vegas. It was Ben did a meet and greet session on the stand that we were on with EBC Breaks, organised by Petroladenism, Chiro. We had a brilliant week. We actually went to SEMA Car Show last week, which is how we met. And it always makes doing podcasts a lot easier when you've gone out, got pissed, had fun, gone in a nightclub and all the rest of it with someone, which is probably why he's written Ben the Dick in this book. Well, how was I going with this? However, on the meet and greet stand with the paper, I remember this now. Ben wrote, I think it was a message to, it wasn't me, it was one of the other guys, wasn't it? And you wrote some expletive on the
Doesn't sound right. I would do that.
on the card. And the card was just left on the table. And Ben thought someone was coming up to have a word with him. Really, they were just sticker collecting off the table. And they slid this card that he'd written to me or one of the other guys with a load of conspirators on and put it in their mate's bag just as they went along collecting cards.
It's unfortunate. I've abused a member of the public who didn't know. Who's just taking a present back for his wife. But there you go.
Has got quite an abusive card there that they probably didn't even know came from the one and only Stig. But this means that we can move on brilliantly into what's actually going on now with Ben Collins. How long was your stint at Tokyo? You were there, you left at series 15 or 16. So that was a huge chunk of your career, which obviously brings us on wonderfully to what you're doing now. Yeah. So how come you were at SEMA? What's now going on in the world of Ben Collins for those that don't know?
Well, unbeknownst to me, whilst I was working on this TV and movies, as well, YouTube was born, and this entire world of content has been brewing. And I still, I thought everything revolved around the big screen, which actually isn't the case. And I think a lot of people now, my kids especially, they're just not really watching TV. They're all watching YouTube. And finally, it's dawned on me that is the place to go. And so I've created my channel, Ben Collins Drives.
Nearly on 100k subscribers.
Click like and subscribe. Yes, please get me over there. Come on, let's get over the top. And I love it. So, having chased my tail, trying to do things with TV and just realized that they can actually just go out and just go and shoot stuff. So I've been going out doing lots of Stig-like things in lots of different cars, getting hold of Formula One cars, amazing Le Mans cars and other, opportunities have just sort of been bubbling up, which I never expected. I never dreamed I would have driven the 6-wheel Tyrrell until it happened this year. And then just, we were talking of ideas, met Chiro, Petroladenism and Sam Hard at Hard Up Garage. It's like, come out to SEMA. And I've been to SEMA before. It's awesome, but never like this. And we went out. There's a rat pack basically of influencers, social media, YouTubers, lunatics like you doing your podcast, and got to meet this whole gang of people. But it was way beyond what I imagined. For me, I was going to go out. I had some people to meet out there, go and make some connections, get something going for my channel. But actually, it was like it was a learning experience, but it was an absolute crack, obviously, tearing up Las Vegas and calling it work.
And that's kind of, I had these moments out in SEMA last week where I just stopped for a minute and go, how is this happening? And it's kind of work, as well. And I was watching it from...
You got so excited you broke your finger.
I did. I did break my right finger, which is not quite straight. It's less colourful,
yeah,
but it's not quite straight. But it's Vegas, isn't it? But I was following you around one of the days, obviously walking around, seeing people, and just the amount of times you would speak to someone for less than 5 minutes. Freddie Tavares, brilliant example. He's been on the podcast, and someone go, "Hey man, you need to drive my car. Like you need to." Is that a little bit surreal for you, or is that just become normal?
Well, I'm incredibly lucky that people would trust me to drive their stuff for a start. And Freddie, he's a giant on YouTube. He's taken on this enormous project with his McLaren P1. And there's others like Matt Armstrong. There's there's you. There's loads of big guys out there. Ammo, the detailer. So there's lots of people who are big stars. I think what's amazing with the YouTube crowd is that they're actually pretty grounded. They're quite humble characters, and they're really open to doing stuff, which is a real breath of fresh air. So having got to know them a little bit, it isn't surprising, but I don't take it for granted either. And so Freddie said, right, once this car's finished, the views are in the multiple millions. People are loving his content, loving what he's doing with the McLaren. So I'll be the first one to drive that. It's going to be awesome. So can't wait to see what he creates. I mean, he's got a massive mission ahead of him. And I hope that his timeline he's able to follow to get it out ready for spring 2024. But it'll be exciting.
So from beginning racing, sitting in the car, 18 years old, going out in Silverstone, moving through a career of building up through racing, figuring out, making mistakes, crashing, ending up in a random interview, I guess, which you didn't even think you'd got at first, sitting in a Dunsfold test track in a Portakabin with James May bringing out cups of teas to becoming one of the most watched, I think it was the most watched programme of all time in one of the most recognisable suits in the world. That's quite a story. And then obviously what then ensued with you leaving Top Gear, legal battles. That's quite the journey. And again, now having your own YouTube channel and starting something again, it always seems that over this period, there's been times where you've had to reinvent the wheel and go again. What would you say is the most memorable or impactful moment for you that you think because of that thing that I did, it's now enabled me to do everything else?
Without doubt, we wouldn't be sitting here if I hadn't been the Stig. And so that was a huge moment in my career, and one that I loved. And I felt that I put everything heart and soul into, and even some small things, silly mannerisms and stuff like that. I still think that they hopefully I added value to that character. But without it, my career would have been completely different. I think I'd have still had a fantastic time, and I think I'd have followed my own star and done something that I would value and found another way to do something, whether it was in different walk of life entirely or through motorsport or other things. But it's enabled me to do stuff that I love. I love writing. So I've written 3 books. I absolutely love sharing knowledge. I love instructing. That's why I wrote How to Drive, because to try and impart as much of my racing knowledge through the medium of storytelling to people who are learning to drive for the first time, or people who maybe have a passion for it, want to learn how to improve their skills even further, that sort of stuff. Or Aston Martin, I went right back to the beginning to tell their story from the very beginning through all the mini biographies of all of the contributors, the engineers, not just looking at metal and pistons and, cubic inches and stuff like that, which are only interesting if you've got the context of why they matter. And that's down to the designer and the engineers and their philosophy. So, I love all of that. I love the creative process of making movies, whether they're James Bond or Star Wars. I got to work on that, or now collaborating with small teams on YouTube, coming up with crazy ideas and doing them. So, it all, for me, it all brings together into one place. You're creating an idea, creating a story, running with it. It's what I love doing. And so I'm people say, do you miss it? Do you look back? I always look back. The days as the Stig were one of a kind. It was a place in time. You look back, it's like absolutely phenomenal. I was so proud to have done it and so much fun. But actually, my day to day doesn't feel much different. So I am blessed with that. I can just crack on and keep making stuff I find interesting.
There's so many people grafting out there with YouTube channels and trying to throw something at a wall and make it stick. And you've been in 2 different stages of a journey, really, which is Top Gear was, as we just said a minute ago, one of the most watched programs of all time with huge views. But would you say that the growing of things like your YouTube channel and the early days of actually growing Top Gear, do you think you were most miserable when Top Gear had the peak views?
I've never been miserable. So, I think, so what do you mean by that?
Do you think the times where you least enjoyed yourself towards the end at Top Gear, for argument's sake, when the views were at its peak, when James could no longer bring the tea and biscuits out to the side of the track because it had become this corporate conglomerate? Sometimes we're all working to get to that stage to try and be at the top, to be at the best. But it actually sounds like with your story, the most exciting times have actually been the journey, the build up.
Oh, I loved every day I did there. I never, no regrets whatsoever. It was fantastic. It's just that I knew that the days were coming to an end, and I had to make a decision. I was at the crossroads. It was like, right, which way, left or right? I think Willman summed it up best, though. He was quite punchy, and he said, I think it was like, if we had any balls, we'd have killed the show and we'd have axed it in 2008. And I thought that was the sort of time of peak Top Gear. So that was when the ideas were very fresh. and it gets harder and harder, to try and keep reinventing new storylines. It's tough. I mean, most TV shows don't live longer than 8 years. It's about where
tough
it's at.
for YouTube channels as well.
Yeah. So I think that's sort of a fact of life. And it was getting harder for them to keep reinventing and keep creating. The corporate side I suppose doesn't help. And, when the team expands and you've got external influences on that sort of stuff, it does dampen things a bit. But no, it was awesome for me, awesome to the end.
You were not the final, Stig, though. What would you say to people, comments out there that say that you killed the Stig?
Well, I can sympathise because I know where they're coming from with that. I mean, the fact is, I did 8 years there in a time when everybody was trying to reveal who it was. It was in the top 10 searches on Google, who is the Stig was up there as a thing. There was massive pressure. Journalists were breaking into the place where I was getting changed to sort of get my ID and stick it out. And I think I fended it off pretty well up until the point it was untenable. At the peak, when in what we would call what do you want to call those years, the golden years of Top Gear. So although it came to an end and I was partly responsible for bursting the bubble, it was going to happen in the end. And so those ones who were disappointed with it, that's tough. But at the same time, I think that what I brought to it, was worth more than what maybe I took away when I left. Plus, there was an opportunity for the next Stig to at least pick a different colour. I mean, come on, they could have gone with something different. Why not? I mean, Manchester United, they change their jerseys every year. It's cool to come up with something different. I thought they could have spun off in a different direction, but actually they kind of clamped down on what Stig could do, and I think that was a shame. So, the next one had a tougher time. I think they just didn't let him out. He's sort of locked in a shed. I don't even know where he is. He's gone missing. He's AWOL. Don't know where he is now. I hope they're feeding him, and that he's not been put to pasture. But no, I mean, I don't. And we miss Top Gear. It's not on the screens at the moment. It's one of those things.
Ben Collins, I thank you so much for coming on and telling your story today, and in so much detail and things that people not necessarily have heard before as well. And to those that have listened and followed today, please check out Ben's journey now on his YouTube channel, the incredible films that he's making with not only driving cars around and being a hooligan, but also some in-depth podcasts yourself, going out, meeting with people like Tavares, driving some incredible cars and rebuilding a Lancia Delta, one of your favourites.
Yes. And you're next on track. I'm going to get hold of this man and I'm going to torture him.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers. Fucking finger.